Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. In this particular video, we are going to look at this IT support expert sample project, which I've put together off the back of a fantastic marketplace template that the Flutterflow team have provided. I've made some changes to it because what you guys have been asking for in a couple of comments is how do you kind of construct something that has kind of a bit of a subject matter expert at the end of it. So I've created this IT support engineer that you can throw a load of questions at it, which is more related to IT support problems. And this AI model will kind of return you back more targeted responses. So let's have a little look at the application, and of course I will make it available for you to clone as well and have a look at itself. We're not going to create it from scratch, but I'm going to walk you through most of the changes that I've made in order to get it to where it is now. So let's give it a whirl. So let's ask our friendly support assistant a simple question then, okay? So my hard drive appears to be making a strange noise. What shall I do? Hit the send button. Let's see what they say. Okay, there's some important advice come back there. So let's ask another question. I'm thinking of buying a Mac. Is this a good idea? Okay, so some good general advice come back there. So let's ask another question. So I'm looking for some security tips for my website. Can you provide advice on what I should consider? Hit the send. Let's see what our IT support expert says. Okay, so there's some good advice coming back. So there's a really simple example here. And what's really nice about this is really concise information. Okay, so what we've done is we've actually set up the initial content into the OpenAI platform to make sure that the type of responses that we get back are more sort of streamlined and more simple in its nature. So I'm going to walk you through that in the walkthrough. So let's go and have a look at the application now. So just a little bit of information before we get started. The original ChatGPT marketplace item is obviously available, which is the one that I actually cloned originally. If you need to look at that, head over to the marketplace, type in ChatGPT, and you'll see here, it's this one here, ChatGPT in Flutterflow. So that's the one that you want to use. So before we start getting into the details of the way that the application actually functions more lower level, I just wanted to point you to this particular web page because I found this really helpful when actually sort of building this application. I'll put the link in the description, so please do go and have a look at it. But what it's talking about here is about using ChatGPT in a slightly different way, and almost to the fact of actually gearing up ChatGPT to kind of get ready for our questions that's more targeted. So in this particular website, they've got a couple of different examples here. In fact, quite a number of examples. So what I found this quite useful is it's actually the IT expert one is the one that I actually use, but of course you can use any of these and then you should get to see more sort of targeted responses that come back for each of these. So just move down to IT expert and you can see here that there's some initial kind of setup that's actually happening here, and what we're doing is we're kind of describing how we actually want the AI to behave, and then we're passing in the first problem. And what we're then hoping to happen is that as we then keep asking these questions, then the responses are going to be very much shaped to the kind of the way that the initial conversation kind of begun. So this pretty well much is giving you a good description of exactly the kind of the shape of the response that we actually need. And of course, we're going to keep passing this back into the API. We're going to keep passing this in, and of course the conversation should then be targeted. And of course we're using a different model here. So if you were to use the ChatGPT sample from the Flutterflow marketplace and you were to ask these questions, the responses that you will get would be very different, and it just wouldn't actually be very helpful. So that's why I've had to make the change of inside this application to provide much more focused kind of responses. So definitely worth having a look at this website because it gives you some good ideas here that you may want to apply in your own solutions. But we're using this one completely as it is. Okay, so it just changes down here, but everything else is exactly as it is. So within Flutterflow, what I've done is I've taken that copy from that website and I've actually loaded it into a page state variable. So all I've done is just click on the your top level page here, support expert. I've renamed this page, by the way, from the template, but it's support expert here. And then here I've got this initial chat script. Okay, so this is what you're going to want to use to customize depending on what scenario or which role that you want your subject matter to be an expert for. So what I've done is I've just taken that text and I've put it actually in here. So what I've done is this is just all one line. I've removed all the carriage returns out, so it's just one piece of content, and it takes us all the way up to the very last kind of part of the sentence. If I just keep moving up here, you'll see this. So there we go, right up to the end there with the full stops. There's no spaces or anything like that. That's just literally copy and pasting that into that initial field value. So once I've got that, what I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to pass that in every single time, and we just want to build up. So as we build up the chat, we're always going to be passing in that as the very, very first entry in the request that goes to the API. Okay, and I've had to load that into that variable so we can just keep using it. So what I've also done, which is different to the sample that's with inside the marketplace, is I've actually changed a lot to do with our state variables actually. So here we've got, and we're using strings instead of sort of JSON or anything like that. So what we're going to do is we're going to start building up our chat history with just a load of strings. And the best way for me to kind of show you how that works is if I go over to Postman. So here we are in Postman now. This is the post request. This is the API that we're going to call into the OpenAI platform. And I'm going to pass in this particular model. Now we've seen this sort of briefly on the API that I was showing you earlier on. But the key thing is here is that with inside the prompt, we can see here that we're passing in our full piece of content. That's our initial sort of conversation setup. And then what I'm actually doing here is, and this is the key thing, is that for the very first request that I'm making, I'm passing in my first question. This forms part of the first prompt that I'm passing in. Now, if I call the API now, if I just hit send, you're now going to see the response come back. This is perfect. This is the kind of what we'd expect to come back from the IT expert. But what I can do is if I now put a comma and then actually just paste in now the next, in fact, just one comma too many there, and just pass in then the next question and hit send, you'll see that the conversation would then continue. There it is. So we've got that now that we've got that response. So that's just what we're going to keep doing with our API. We're just going to keep building up the query, but we're going to keep passing in the very, very first question at the top here. So let's now move back to Flutterflow and let's see how that works. So inside Flutterflow, we've got a number of additional custom functions. Okay, so if I just click on the custom functions here, the ones that were part of the original sample have been removed. We don't need to convert to JSON anymore, but we are still using save chat history, but there's been some changes made to it. And that is because what we're actually doing is instead of handling JSON documents, we're just handling strings, right? You saw on the Postman that we had there, we're just producing a list of strings. So that's what we've basically changed it to. So you can see here that I'm passing in the new chat, I'm passing in the initial chat, and I'm also passing in the chat history here every single time that we call this custom function. So you'll see here that we've got these new parameters set up here, as you can see that that's been defined here. But the code is quite simple actually. We're actually just checking to see if the chat history starts off as 0, so it's the very, very first one. And then what we're doing is we're passing in the initial chat setup, which is kind of what I explained in the Postman request just a second ago, and then plus the new chat. So we know it's a brand new series of questions, the initial chat, and then we're adding on the new chat as the first request. And of course, every time we keep passing in the chat history into this function, every single time, we just keep adding in the new chat, the new question into this. Okay, and that's how we'll then build up that series of list of strings that get passed into the Open API platform. And of course, we're just returning back the list back. We're adding in, we're returning it back. Okay, so that's the slight little change that we made here. The remove from string, this is really just a helper little function here, and you're going to see that very, very shortly with a slight tweak that I've had to make to the UI. If you've noticed, when we actually run the application, one of the very, very first, when we make that first question, we don't actually see that initial chat that we've sort of set up, our script, as it were. We don't want to see that. So what I've done is I've made a slight change to the UI. In fact, I'll just show you that here. If I go back to the UI builder, you can see here that we've now, instead this would normally have said chat item, but I've actually got a remove from string. So really all I'm doing is I've made a change here, and I'm calling into that custom function where I'm passing in the chat item that would originally been here in the first place. And what I do is I'm passing the initial chat in. That's the value from our page state that we set up. That's our script. So I'm basically passing that in there, and all I'm really doing is I'm saying that actually just remove that out. We don't want to see that as part of that's going to be added to the chat history. So it's just a visibility thing. We just don't want to see it. So and we know that's only going to appear on the first one. So it's really just kind of replacing it. So it's just a really, really simple custom function that is removing it. It's taking the actual input value, and then it's just it's actually then replacing the value that the chat script put into the function, and it's replacing it with nothing. So just clearing it out. And that's why with inside the application, of course, you just see a very, very simple the question that you've actually asked instead of the overall initial chat script. Okay. So that's the custom functions, really quite simple. I've not added anything more into that, of course. So let's move back to the actual widget tree. Let's move back to the actions here. So I'll just go back to the icon. Let's open up the action flow editor, and let's just double check to see how this is working here. So update the widget state. Let's just have a look here. So this is a slight change that we've made. So the chat history is now just being set up, and we're just calling the save chat history. Now everything else remains the same. We've got the list of the chat history that we're passing in every single time. We've got the new chat, which is really just a text field. Okay, that's the detail of the question that's being asked, and of course I'm passing in the initial chat as well into that function, as we just explained just a moment ago. So that's all that we're doing there. Of course, we're just building up that list of chat. The API remains the same, no change. As I said, the API key earlier, the response is exactly the same. The update widget state is very, very similar. We're just updating the chat history, and we're just going to be setting the value in here to the actual response that we've got coming back. So if we just change it here, actually this is a slight change that I've actually made here, is this particular new chat. So what this is actually doing is it's actually returning back the last chat item in the list that actually comes back. So within Postman, you're going to get a number of responses that come back here. We just want to collect the last one and add that to our chat history. So that's how that particular section works there. So the last bit I want to cover is the changes to the API, or the use of the API within inside this particular application compared to the one from the marketplace. So just head over to the API call section within inside Flutterflow and click on the Open API there, click on the send full prompt, and you can see here that actually the post request URL is now different. In the one that you've probably seen in the marketplace, it's got chat/completions. We've made some changes to the body because we're now using a different model, which and I'll show you that in a second on the documentation, and we're passing some additional key value pairs as well. So if you move over to the actual API reference, you can see here that on the left hand side we've got completion selected. The one in the sample app is chat, but we're using completions, and because we're using completion, it has a different endpoint there and has a different model that we need to pass over. So get yourself familiar with that, but that's the difference that we're using with inside the API. So other than that, the only other little change that we've made here is with inside the headers is the API key. Now the API key is now stored within the application state. So of course, when you come to clone this application, make sure that's where you change the API, and then you can fire up the application. It will work in a function as normal. But just bear in mind, of course, when you're actually invoking all of these APIs to the platform system, potentially could be costing you money as well. So just be very, very careful on how much you're kind of hammering the API. But just keep an eye on that with inside your platform billing sort of page. It'll give you an idea of the usage and that kind of stuff that you're using. So that's the API. I just wanted to cover that before we close out the video. So there we go, everybody. Thank you for joining me for this particular video. I hope you've enjoyed this really, really quick walkthrough of the customizations that I've made to the ChatGPT template in order to kind of make this application. I hope you found it useful. Please do check the links in the description, of course, because you'll be able to clone this project. The key thing to remember, though, of course, is you make sure you put your own API key in order for it to be functional. Please do like the video. Really do appreciate all your likes. And of course, if you're not a subscriber, please also subscribe as well. There's going to be so much more of this stuff coming in the future. Love using Flutterflow, love putting these applications together, and it's really enjoyable. And please also check some of the other content out on my channel as well, which you might find useful. So until the next one, thank you for joining me, and we'll see you soon.